to the Wildy West, a podcast dedicated to being a voice for wild horses. My name is Chase McGoran, and I will be your host. Let's save these horses together. All I ask you to do is listen. Alberta's mountain horses are in danger. We've spent these last few weeks going into detail on the amazing history of these animals, affectionately known as wildies, and their existence in today's environment. These magnificent horses, who evolved on the North American continent, face incredible challenges to their survival. They have a high mortality rate, with less than 10% of foals making it to their first birthday. The majority are taken down by wolves, grizzly bears, mountain lions, and human poachers. The long, harsh winters of the Alberta foothills, where temperatures can dip as low as minus 45 degrees Celsius, also takes its toll on these horses. They have to paw through foot-high drifts to find forage and eat snow for hydration when the creeks and rivers freeze over. We lose a number of horses to starvation and impaction colic, which is when the digestive tract is blocked by dehydrated, unprocessed vegetation every year, as well as fall victim to accidents, such as fighting with other horses, being hit by logging trucks, tripping, or other mishaps. We've lost many horses to unfortunate accidents over the years, like the stallion who accidentally impaled himself on a tree branch, puncturing his lung. It's sad that the best case scenario for that animal was for someone to come along and put it out of its misery before it was eaten alive by predators. Even with all of the threats and struggles these animals face from the habitat they live in, the biggest threat they face is human. From the destruction of their habitat due to logging, overgrazing by cattle, poaching, indiscriminate shooting, and now even government culling and their forced contraception. It is clear that our wildies face an uphill battle. So far, the episodes you have seen have been interviews with advocates for the livelihood of the mountain horse. Today, the guest we had wanted was Todd Loewen, Minister of Forestry and Parks, MLA for Central Peace-Notley, and Public Representative for the people of Alberta. We reached out to extend Mr. Loewen an invitation to join us here and give fair discussion to the policies that he endorses. We reached out on December 5th, 2024, and unfortunately, we were met with no response. While we understand that he is very busy, we were disheartened that a representative of Alberta's people was unable to give us a response at all. We did not even receive something from his office saying no, or that he doesn't have the time. While we were given the cold shoulder, in the interest of fairness, we want to show both sides to the discussion of Alberta's wildies, specifically giving Mr. Loewen the opportunity to share his perspective. Since we feel this discussion is so important, we've decided to go ahead without him and try to use what public information is available to answer the questions we had for him. The government has a long and storied history with the Alberta Mountain Horse. These animals once numbered in the tens of thousands, roaming across millions of acres on the rugged eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. They provided the indigenous people with mobility, something that interfered with the government's ability to subjugate and control the indigenous people. When the bison were killed, they removed their food source. Killing the wild horses was meant to curtail their independence and mobility, forcing them to stay captive on the reservations and destroying the indigenous culture and way of life. In the 1800s, in an effort to eradicate the wild horse and cripple the indigenous people's independence, the government enlisted the help of bounty hunters who were paid for horse scalps and ears. In 1899, the South African War, also known as the Boer War, erupted between the British and two republics settled by Dutch descendants. During the Boer War, the Alberta government, having labeled the horses as feral, rounded up more than 10,000 pounds of horseflesh and shipped them overseas for human consumption. This served two purposes. First, it made the government look like the good guys, having just provided humanitarian aid to the starving. Second, we speculate it furthered their agenda to subjugate and control the indigenous population by removing that source of mobility. They continued with their attempt to eradicate the wild horse by rounding up and sending another 10,000 pounds overseas for consumption during World War II. Again, an attempt to look like the saviors to the world, while simultaneously decimating the wild horses and continuing their oppression of the indigenous. Today, the trend toward equine genocide persists, only now it is given a small token of admission that they belong on our landscape. Meanwhile, the actions taken by our government do not reflect this, as they have a cap on the population, but no minimum. It comes down to a few self-serving individual ranchers who don't want to share the grass. They want every single blade for their cattle. In 2014, the Feral Horse Advisory Committee was started by, we believe, the Cattlemen's Association, to address how to remove the horses from their land. It is unfortunately difficult to find specific information regarding the original committee, since it was dissolved and only reinstated in 2021, with their first meeting being at the end of March. Information about the reformed committee overshadows most information about the original. This committee was stacked with wild horse antagonists, and only a few wild horse advocates were included, whose presence was used to only provide token representation for their plans for culling and contraception, their concerns being largely ignored. The first question we had wanted to ask Alberta's Minister of Forestry and Parks, Todd Loewen, was simple. What is your stance on the Alberta wild horses? Since, unfortunately, he is not here to answer that question, the only response we can find is from his public Facebook page. On November 4th, 2024, Mr. Loewen posted the following written statement on his page. Alberta's government is dedicated to protecting our native wildlife, vegetation, and feral horses, ensuring they thrive in their ecosystems. In areas like the Elbow and Clearwater equine zones, where horse populations have exceeded management thresholds set in the feral horse management framework, we're looking at options like adoption and contraception. This approach reflects the guidelines from the Feral Horse Advisory Committee, which includes input and support from advocacy groups, grazing organizations, wildlife groups, and academics, including those represented on the committee. He went on to post an Adobe stock photo, number 133122 506, of horses running through a stream that were not even Alberta Mountain Horses. With the caption, "Responsible management ensures a thriving future for our wild horses and the landscapes they call home." Todd Loewen, Minister of Forestry and Parks. This post received over 900 comments, the overwhelming majority of which were negative. If you've watched our previous episodes, then you will already understand why. People love these horses, and they were quick to let Todd Loewen know. My follow-up question would be thus: how did you arrive at a total acceptable population of 1,700 horses in 2.2 million acres when the International Union for Conservation of Nature defines an endangered species as any species with less than 2,500 mature individuals, or less than 250 mature individuals in any subpopulation? The answer to that question is unfortunately unsubstantiated due to the nature of it, in that it was supposedly done on a handshake deal. This is 32% lower than the ICUN minimum number to declare a species endangered. To me, this makes no sense. Shouldn't the aim be somewhere above 2,500? The current total count for 2024 was less than 1,500. This is 40% lower than the ICUN number declaring a species endangered, yet they want to implement wild horse removals and contraception? How does doing so allow the population to increase to the already too low 1,700? Why are they just blatantly ignoring the ICUN guidelines? The unfortunate reality is that it is based in the flawed feral horse management framework, which claims to be supported by advocacy groups. To give you a little more information about the feral horse management framework, it is a document that was created outlining the general approach to things like the boundaries of the areas considered, the total limits per area, and the way in which the horses are handled. It also gives you more insight as to what certain words mean. For instance, the Memorandum of Understanding details that adoption doesn't mean that the horses are going to be introduced to the domestic population. The male horses are taken in and gelded before the process of domestication begins. If you're less familiar with horses, gelding is, simply put, the term for castrating them so that they are unable to reproduce. This is certainly standard practice when talking about animals that have populations that are higher than the environment allows. For instance, this is common practice with dogs that are abandoned and brought into overpopulated shelters. The Alberta Mountain Horse is far from overpopulated, and removing their means of reproduction means that not even their legacy can continue in their forced domestication. The framework goes into quite a large amount of detail about the plans that were set out as acceptable for the management of the wild horses. I highly encourage you to take a look at it yourself. You can find it by simply searching Alberta Feral Horse Management Framework, or it'll be linked in the description below. Although, the response from Daryl Glover, who you might remember from episode 1 of the series, will shed some light on how they actually feel. Help Alberta Wildies Society, HAWS, was founded in 2014, when the Alberta government was exercising an eradication agenda through massive annual culls. Public reaction was swift and clear that this was not acceptable. Equine genocide of the few remaining wild horses, declared by U of C genetic specialist Dr. Poissant as unique to Alberta, will once again be stopped by the true stakeholders, the Alberta public. This framework is not based on science. It is imposed by the Rangeland Department under the current UCP government. HAWS is one of 2 advocacy groups allowed to sit on the Feral Horse Advisory Committee, the FHAC, which is almost totally comprised of anti-horse stakeholders. Note, Hawes did not sign off nor agree to the ridiculously low threshold limits imposed by rangeland on the 6 equine management zones. The Clearwater Zone is approximately 550,000 acres and has been assigned a red line threshold limit of 99 wild horses. That equals 5,555 acres per horse. Does that sound like a fair and reasonable science-based solution for a threatened species? Not to mention that the department is using data which is 1 year old and has no idea what the current population is in the Clearwater Zone, planning to capture and remove wild horses, while at the same time implementing contraception to mares, which will suppress birthing for 3 to 5 years. Pretty much describes equine genocide, or the slow burn to eradication. Sounds like this minister wants to test you again. Of course, they will have their usual supporters that will agree to eradicate. There are many misinformed folks that drank the propaganda Kool-Aid for many years. Do you remember when they told you that wild horses had no natural predators? Hawes has spent the last 10 years debunking all of that propaganda and presenting the truth through citizen science. That has been our only mission. Now, with over 500,000 followers on our social media Facebook page, we are able to share the truth through thousands of real-time trail camera videos showing that the majority of foals born in the spring, for example, never make it to next spring. Predation is real, and it has controlled the wild horse population to static or declining levels for many years, not skyrocketing as the government and other interest groups would like you to believe. To be clear, this message from the minister states that the wild horses will enjoy a thriving future on the landscapes they call home, while planning to further reduce their dwindling numbers through removals and birth control. They're hoping you won't notice. We, Hawes, and all of our followers are noticing. They cannot prove through science that these remaining wild horses are causing damage to the environment, because they have the science. The only reason that the persecution of these wild horses continues is because they eat grass. Daryl Glover. This was followed by comments claiming that the framework is science-based. Daryl was again more than happy to debunk this assertion. The department of the chief scientist cherry-picked 5 peer-reviewed papers with totally irrelevant data from international jurisdictions as their science to base this framework on. It is not science from our foothills, nor about our Alberta horses. Check out the peer-reviewed critique by wildlife biologist Wayne McCrory, which shows extreme flaws in the framework. This study was sent to the department of Todd Loewen, but we unfortunately are unable to find any response or acknowledgement that demonstrates that it was ever even read. There are further dissenting comments from other concerned people. Without exception, the narrative from government agencies that oversee the wild horse file is based on the same agenda. Ignore the science, ignore the truth, and push out falsehoods to the public under the guise of a thriving ecosystem. It's quite rich to point to the guidelines set out by the Feral Horses Advisory Committee, the FHAC, when only the voices from the anti-wild horse groups are being heard. The intrinsic value of Alberta's wild horses is being greatly underestimated. Most of us don't think about attaching a dollar value to these horses. Their value is rooted in the importance we place on wilderness, freedom, and the web of life and beauty that exists in Alberta's wild spaces. Or another that brings up an excellent point we would like to raise as well. Please put aside your personal interests, outfitting, and do the right thing by the horses. A quick Google search shows that Todd Loewen is the CEO and owner of Red Willow Outfitters Limited, an outfitting company. Many people see this as a conflict of interest and have been raising issue with it for some time. Mr. Loewen claims that his company is not a conflict of interest, but I'm sitting here wondering how. How is it not a conflict of interest that he runs a company that makes its money by signing people up to hunt animals? A few weeks later, on November 29th, there was a follow-up post in response. This one receiving even more comments, at almost 1,000. It's disappointing to see misinformation being spread about Alberta's approach to managing feral horses. To be clear, there is no cull, and we have not considered a cull. Inflammatory claims like these make it clear that this is an appeal to emotions, at the cost of misleading Albertans and distracting from the carefully considered work Alberta is doing to manage and preserve animal populations. To keep horse populations in line with the guidelines set out in the Feral Horse Management Framework, up to 30 may be chosen to go to good homes, and up to 90 may receive a one-time vaccine that will, on average, only be effective for 1 to 3 years. We already discussed what this actually means for the horses. This approach is not new. It was heavily pushed by horse advocacy groups, including the Wild Horses of Alberta Society, who first piloted the program in 2016 and called it the most humane and effective method of controlling the numbers. To further misinform the public, some are claiming that the Feral Horse Advisory Committee represented biased interests. That could not be further from the truth. The committee represented a number of horse advocacy groups, universities, Indigenous communities, and wildlife advocacy groups. The following were at the table and helped create the framework: Wild Horses of Alberta Society, Horse Welfare Alliance of Canada, Help Alberta Wildies Society, University of Alberta, University of Saskatchewan, Stoney Nakoda First Nation, Alberta Wildlife Federation, Alberta Wilderness Association, Rocky Mountain Forest Range Association, Trout Unlimited, West Fraser, Livestock Identification Services, Royal Canadian Mount Police, Alberta Professional Outfitters Association, Helmer Creek Ranch. The committee considered scientific research from dozens of academic, peer-reviewed sources and several experts, including academics from the universities of Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Calgary. The Office of the Chief Scientist also examined over 150 academic, scientific, and related papers when considering the framework. The reality is that the latest minimum counts show 1,478 individual horses across Alberta. I'm glad that he recognizes how few there are. Now, he just needs to understand how unacceptably low that is. A number that was determined through the same methods used to count animals across jurisdictions, which have been endorsed and supported by the Office of the Chief Scientist. The department publishes the count information, including photographs to support the numbers observed. And stakeholders, including the Haws, are always welcome to come along for the counts, which they have done many times. It is also important to note that the department will be flying the Feral Horse Survey again in January or February, which will provide additional data on population and range of feral horses. Feral horse populations must be managed, as with all domesticated animals and wildlife. Populations like elk, deer, and moose are managed to prevent overpopulation and impacts to the landscape. Cattle are not allowed to roam, graze, and populate freely. Their grazing is managed by agrologists and restricts them to clearly defined zones designed to ensure the land remains healthy and productive. In this post, he's quoting CBC News from almost a decade past, July 19th, 2016. What relevance does that have now in 2025, or when he posted at the end of 2024? The photos in the post show that wild horse advocates were in agreement with wild horse birth control as a humane solution to population growth, and Bob Henderson, then the president of Wild Horses of Alberta Society, WOAS, said it's the most humane and a very effective method of controlling the numbers. However, that was 9 years ago. Bob does not feel the same way anymore, and it makes this quote misleading and misrepresentative. Bob has since left WOAS and started another advocacy group called Alberta Mountain Horse Society. In fact, he commented directly to this post, saying, "Comments in your post related to myself are from 9 years ago, when we were trying our best to come up with a way to help manage the horse population. We learned that in the Alberta foothills, a contraception program using the vaccine at the time was not viable. Further, I have always personally been against the removal of the wild horses from the landscape. In a detailed report to Bob Semirich, in response to managed plans, it stated that there will never again be indiscriminate culling of wild horses as part of any management plan. I just want to clarify the issue." Daryl Glover, president of Haws, further challenged Mr. Loewen to a public town hall debate. "Mr. Loewen, I personally challenge you, as president of Haws, to a town hall-style on-stage debate, where you will have every opportunity to point out the misinformation that you accuse us of. Have you got the guts, Mr. Loewen? I doubt it, as you did refuse to meet with me after you took this office. My offer has no expiry date, Mr. Loewen. Let's get on stage in front of some cameras, and let's hear what you have to say and show us the proof you have to support it. We won't have any problem showing our proof to support everything we say. Daryl Glover, President, Help Alberta Wildies Society." I know I would certainly love to see him take up Mr. Glover's challenge. The following comment brings up an excellent topic. How can you claim that there's no cull when you've admitted 30 wild horses will be removed and sent to good homes? Removing 30 wild horses is, by definition, a cull. You can dress it up however you like, but that's what it is. If this goes ahead, can you truly guarantee these horses are suitable? And will you follow up to ensure these wild horses are properly cared for? I seriously doubt it. On top of that, you plan to vaccinate 90 mares to prevent them from foaling for 3 years, likely repeating the process once it wears off. Are you unaware that nature regulates itself and that foal survival rates are already 10% or less? At this pace, the wild horses will vanish entirely. These animals belong in the wild. They aren't harming anyone or anything. In fact, they play a positive role in the environment, not a destructive one. As you may remember from our previous interview with Dr. Claudia Notska, wild horses have a very positive impact on the environment around them. They do an amazing job at reseeding the vegetation in their grazing areas, as well as diverting predators from other prey.
Horses are also, of all herbivores, tend to be the most effective seeders. They have a very inefficient digestive system, and anybody who has dealt with horse poop knows perfectly well that a lot of what goes in front comes out in the back totally undamaged. That includes seeds. Finally, horses also provide prey for predators. which takes predator pressure away from other species. Some government officials will tell you that also attracts predators, but that we have no evidence of that, and there's no scientific proof of that happening.
Further comments show just how upset the populace is. Mr. Loewen, as an elected official, you have a duty to listen to the concerns of your electorate. How we treat animals is a measure of who we are. It defines our character and moral progress. We know the facts don't add up. Leave our wildies alone. Why the F would the Alberta Professional Outfitters Association be on this committee? A guaranteed vote for your interests? Cry from the people is obvious. But they aren't feeling heard. Then we have the following very interesting comment. It's not just the horses. It's the wolves, the bears, all the trapping you are allowing. You need to stop trying to manage nature. People get involved and things always go wrong. Let it take care of itself like it was meant to. This comment, that it is not just about the horses, is what makes it interesting. You see, Mr. Loewen has been responsible for allowing the hunting of problem grizzly bears, cougars, wolves, and wolverines, as well as giving the green light to a cull of wild horses. Allegedly. Let's listen to a clip of Mr. Loewen in Parliament discussing wolverine hunting with a biologist from the opposing party.
Forestry and Parks has done something no other minister has done. He's opened up unlimited trapping for wolverines, species at risk. The minister has said this is to get more data about how many there are, but what? Seems to me like the dead wolverine doesn't have much to share about how many live wolverines there are. This approach to estimating population isn't like any I, as a wildlife biologist, have ever heard of. Can the minister please enlighten us as to what kinds of data will be collected by lifting bag limits on wolverine trapping?
The Honourable Minister of Forestry and Parks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it's a joy to actually talk about wolverines. This might be the first time in the legislature we've had to have this discussion. But what we found with the wolverine quota that was in place when the NDP were in government is that it had no basis. We had a wolverine quota where there were no wolverines, and we had a limited quota where there was lots of wolverines. So, Minister, that was indefensible. So we were sitting there with a quota of more wolverines than actually exist in the province. So the quota meant nothing. It was indefensible. The NDP couldn't defend it when they were in power, and we couldn't either. So now we've got rid of that.
The Honourable Member for Bath-Kananaskis.
Well, given that removing the bag limits isn't defensible either, Mr. Speaker, given that wolverines have low population densities, which has led to concerns about previous limits, given that for the last 15 years, researchers in Alberta and BC have worked very hard to estimate wolverine populations, and they've suggested there are less than 1,000 wolverines in Alberta. Given that there are 1,600 trap lines in Alberta, if each trap line caught even one wolverine, we'd likely eliminate the population. How can the minister justify yet another decision putting species at risk further at risk?
The Honourable Minister of Forestry and Parks.
And just like I said, the quota was higher than the number of wolverines, which meant it wasn't defensible. And if we look at BC has no quota, and so we have trappers with a lot of wolverines, and just across the border, imaginary line, there's no quota. Mr. Speaker, when we collect data from the trappers of Alberta, 1,600 trappers in Alberta, they can go around the province and they can provide us with more data, more information for wolverines so we can properly manage them and come up with a system that actually makes sense and is defensible.
The Honourable Member for Bath-Kananaskis.
Given it seems the minister has written the 4th chapter in his book about wildlife management, which is like, don't like the standard methodology, make up your own. Given that the Public Service is currently reviewing the latest research to write a status report, which will result in wolverines being listed as threatened, given that the first step in recovering any species at risk is limiting human-caused mortality, and I've received over 200 emails just this weekend from Albertans protesting the trapping of wolverines, and an online petition has 1,700 signatures already. Can the minister explain why he doesn't want to listen to science experts or Albertans?
Order. The Honourable Honourable Minister of Forestry and Parks.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And yes, we want to be able to collect that data too, which is why we have 1,600 trappers in Alberta that will be providing us information on the wolverines. And that's how the past studies in Alberta have been done, with information for the trappers of Alberta. It's only the registered trappers in Alberta, which a lot of them, in fact, more than half of them, are First Nations trappers. We're going to listen to the trappers. We're going to collect the data from the people that are on the landscape, spending way more hours on than the member opposite is, that's for sure, and her biologist friends that have an ideology that they're focused on rather than the common sense management of wildlife, which is what the Alberta trappers want to do.
In this video, he states that he will be getting his data about the health of the wolverine population from the trappers that spend a lot of time out there, and that he is able to do so by completely removing the limits of what is permissible in their trapping. The reasoning for this appears to be that the limit previously was higher than the population. In this video, he states that he will be getting his data about the health of the wolverine population from the trappers that spend a lot of time out there, and that he is able to do so by completely removing the limits of what is permissible in their trapping. The reasoning for this appears to be that the limit previously was higher than the population. However, as is brought up, what he has done is the opposite of what common sense dictates. I think that if you don't have enough information to make an informed decision on the matter, then the most logical response would be to stop the trapping or lower it drastically to avoid damaging the population beyond repair. We can see from Mr. Loewen's attitude on these animals that it doesn't feel like he actually has any concern for the fact that he has allowed it, so the entire population can be wiped out from the possibly unknowing trappers. Something else that really bothers me is the inconsistent belief in the information gathered from the boots on the ground. It seems that when talking about the wolverines, since he has a vested interest in the trapping industry, he is happy to take the information that is provided. Yet, when we look at the previous comments he has made about our wildies, he entirely discounts both that same type of source and the scientific research that backs it up. It feels as though there is some heavily biased information gathering being done, and it does not sit well with me. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode speaking about the minister that is supposed to be responsible for the well-being of these horses in the Wildy West. Again, we really wish that we could have had him on to speak and create more of a dialogue around the subject and allow the representation that we feel is so important. The amount of support we have received from everyone has really meant a lot, and it brings us closer to seeing these animals saved. A huge thank you to everyone that I was lucky enough to interview this season. If you want to help, there are a ton of different things you can do. If you live in Canada, you can write to your local member of parliament or directly to the office of Mr. Todd Loewen. If you aren't as comfortable doing that, you may wish to follow Help Alberta Wildie Society, or HAWS, on Facebook to get more involved and see what other things you can do. And of course, every like and comment means a lot. And clicking subscribe on YouTube will do even more for us. Every little bit truly does help and allows me to show tangible proof that people care. If you would be so kind as to share this with friends or family that you think might be interested in this topic, or who you think would want to help, I would really appreciate it. Next week, I will be interviewing Wayne McCrory, and we'll talk about his insights on the Alberta Mountain Horse. If you would like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter, or X, and Blue Sky using the tag @TheWildyWest. For any business inquiries, please contact us at thewildywest@gmail.com. I am your host, Chase McGorn. Thank you once again for listening to The Wildy West.